Professor Vex-Nine clicked his mandibles together in what passed for satisfaction among the Kalari species. Another semester, another batch of fresh-faced military cadets ready to learn about the galaxy's most spectacular military failures. And oh, what a failure he had to share today. "Settle down, you larval excuses for future officers," he barked at the assembled students. The amphitheater fell silent, except for the soft shuffling of chitinous feet and the occasional nervous whistle from a Thraxian breathing apparatus. Cadet Zira Moonwhisper, a young Velothi with silver-blue skin that shimmered under the lecture hall's harsh lights, adjusted her datapad and looked up expectantly. She'd heard whispers about today's topic in the mess hall. Something about humans. Those strange bipedal creatures from the third spiral arm that everyone seemed to have an opinion about. "Today, we study the Sol-Hegemony War," Professor Vex-Nine announced, his compound eyes gleaming with what might have been amusement. A textbook example of how superior technology, tactical brilliance, and overwhelming numbers can absolutely, positively guarantee victory against a primitive species. A few chuckles rippled through the class. Everyone knew how these human stories ended. The poor creatures were probably extinct by now, another footnote in the Galactic hegemony's march toward universal order. Cadet Brix Starfall, a hulking Morgani whose rocky hide looked like it could stop a plasma rifle, raised one massive hand. "Professor, weren't the humans the ones who tried to fight with chemical propulsion weapons?" "Oh, Cadet Starfall, they were so much worse than that." Just one thing before we begin. YouTube tells me 94.3% of you watching aren't subscribed. Subscribing is free. It really supports the channel, and you'll get more amazing HFY sci-fi stories delivered straight to you. Don't miss out. Vex-Nine's mandibles clicked rapidly, the Kalari equivalent of gleeful rubbing of hands. Chemical propulsion was just the beginning. They had crude nuclear weapons that could barely crack a moon's surface. Their fastest ships couldn't even break light speed without taking decades to reach nearby stars. And their military doctrine? Absolutely primitive. The professor activated the holographic display at the center of the amphitheater. A blue-green world materialized, spinning slowly in the artificial light. Earth. Population at the time. 8 billion. Military vessels. Roughly 2,000. And I'm being generous with that count. Most of them were glorified transport ships with weapons bolted onto the sides. Cadet Trin Voidseeker, whose translucent Etherian form flickered slightly with curiosity, spoke up. "What did they do when the hegemony fleet arrived, Professor?" "What any sensible species would do when faced with 5 million warships, each one capable of sterilizing a continent," Vex-Nine replied. "They surrendered immediately and begged for mercy." "Did they get it?" asked Zira, though she already suspected the answer. "Of course not." The professor's laugh was a harsh, clicking sound. "The hegemony had standards to maintain. Can't have primitive species thinking they can just exist in hegemony space without proper authorization." The bombardment lasted exactly 47 minutes. Quite efficient, really. The holographic Earth began to glow with simulated weapons fire. Tiny pinpricks of light represented the massive hegemony fleet, while Earth sat defenseless in the center of the display. "Now," Vex-Nine continued, warming to his subject, "this is where it gets interesting from a tactical perspective. The humans, in their desperation, tried something that military historians still laugh about in academic circles. They sent out what they called generation ships, massive, slow vessels carrying refugees to other star systems. Cadet Corps Nightbane, whose cybernetic implants whirred softly as he processed information, looked confused. But, Professor, wouldn't the Hegemony fleet have easily intercepted such slow targets? You'd think so, wouldn't you? Vex-Nine's tone carried the weight of someone about to deliver a punchline. But here's the beautiful irony. The Hegemony fleet was so focused on the glorious bombardment of Earth that they let a few of these pathetic refugee ships escape into the void. Command figured they'd die anyway. No proper life support, no FTL capability, no chance of reaching habitable worlds within their lifespans. The display shifted to show tiny dots moving away from the burning Earth at what looked like glacial speed compared to the Hegemony's sleek vessels. The war was declared over 3 hours after it began, the professor continued. Earth, obliterated. Human military, annihilated. Refugee ships, irrelevant. The Hegemony moved on to more important conquests, and the humans became a minor footnote in military academy textbooks. Zira raised her hand tentatively. Professor, the textbook mentions something about Phase 2 of the Sol-Hegemony conflict. What was that about? Vex-Nine's mandibles stopped clicking. For a moment, his compound eyes seemed to lose some of their gleam. Ah, yes, Phase 2. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Well, that happened roughly 2 centuries later. Some of those generation ships had apparently survived their journey. They found habitable worlds? Brix asked. Not exactly. The professor's tone had shifted subtly. They found something else entirely. You see, it turns out that 200 years alone in space does interesting things to a species' perspective, especially when that species spends those 2 centuries thinking about what happened to their home world. The classroom had grown quieter. Even the usual background chatter of data pads and shifting cadets had died down. The first indication that Phase 2 had begun, Vex-Nine continued, was when Hegemony listening posts started picking up strange transmissions from uninhabited systems, military-grade encryption, but using patterns that didn't match any known Hegemony protocols. Cadet Trin flickered more intensely, which among Etherians indicated heightened interest. What kind of transmissions? Coordinates, mostly. Star charts, fleet movements, the kind of information that would be extremely valuable to someone planning. Well, let's call it strategic operations against Hegemony assets. Core's implants whirred faster. Were they communicating with other species? Building an alliance? That's what the Hegemony assumed initially. Standard counterintelligence protocols were implemented. Increased patrols in affected sectors. Monitoring of known rebellious species. The usual procedures. Vex-Nine's mandibles began clicking again, but slower now. The first actual incident occurred at Hegemony Station Omega-7, a research facility studying exotic matter in the Kepler Nebula. The holographic display shifted to show a massive space station, bristling with weapons and surrounded by a small fleet of guard ships. The station went dark during a routine communication check, the professor continued. The automated distress beacon activated for exactly 14 seconds before cutting out. When the nearest patrol fleet arrived 6 hours later, they found the station. Found it how? Zira asked, though something in the professor's tone made her suspect she didn't want to know the answer. Intact, fully operational, every system running perfectly, life support optimal, artificial gravity nominal, and not a single living being aboard. 15,000 Hegemony personnel had simply vanished. The classroom was dead silent now. The security recording showed nothing useful, Vex-Nine went on. Normal operations right up until the moment when every camera simultaneously cut to static. When they came back online 4 minutes later, the station was empty. No signs of struggle, no weapon discharge residue, No indication of forced entry. The personnel hadn't even had time to draw their sidearms. Brix shifted uncomfortably, his rocky hide scraping against his seat. What about the guard fleet? Didn't they detect anything approaching? The guard fleet reported no unusual sensor readings. No ships, no energy signatures, no gravitational anomalies. Whatever happened to Omega-7 happened without any detectable external intervention. Cadet Syl Dreamcatcher, who'd been quietly taking notes throughout the lecture, finally spoke up. "Professor, how many incidents like this were there? Over the next 50 years? Roughly 800. Research stations, military outposts, patrol fleets, mining operations. Always the same pattern. Normal operations, brief communication blackout. Then empty facilities with no signs of what had happened." The professor's compound eyes swept across the classroom. The hegemony's best minds analyzed every aspect of these incidents. Xenobiologists, quantum physicists, military strategists, even theoretical metaphysicists. The consensus was that some unknown species had developed cloaking technology beyond anything in our databases. Did they ever figure out who was responsible? Trin asked. Eventually. Vex-Nine's mandibles clicked once, sharply. It took nearly 70 years, but hegemony intelligence finally intercepted a transmission that broke their encryption protocols. The message was simple. For Earth, for our home, the debt will be paid. Zira felt her chromatic skin shift toward a deeper blue, the Valathi equivalent of a chill running down one's spine. The humans? But they were extinct. Were they? The professor's tone had become almost conversational. Remember those generation ships that the hegemony let escape? 200 years is a long time, Cadet Moonwhisper. Long enough for a species to adapt, to change, to become something new. The holographic display now showed a timeline stretching from Earth's destruction to the mysterious incidents centuries later. The final phase of the Sol-Hegemony War began in earnest after that intercepted transmission. The hegemony mobilized the largest fleet in its history. 40 million ships, representing every member species and client race. The objective was simple. Find these surviving humans and finish what should have been completed centuries earlier. Core leaned forward, his implants processing data at maximum speed. And did they find them? Professor Vex-Nine was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried an odd note, something that might have been respect, if such a thing were possible from a Kalari military historian. "Oh, they found them, Cadet Nightbane. They found them exactly where the humans wanted to be found." The display shifted to show a massive fleet formation. Thousands upon thousands of ships arranged in perfect battle order around what appeared to be an empty patch of space. The Battle of the Void, as military historians call it, lasted exactly 37 hours, the largest naval engagement in galactic history. 40 million hegemony vessels against— He paused dramatically. Against what appeared to be absolutely nothing. Nothing? Brix rumbled. The humans had indeed learned a great deal in their 2 centuries of exile. They had developed technology that made them effectively invisible to every sensor system the hegemony possessed. The fleet found itself fighting ghosts. Zira's skin had shifted to a pale, almost white shade. What happened to the hegemony fleet? What do you think happened, Cadet Moonwhisper? The professor's compound eyes fixed on her. 40 million ships, the pride of a galactic civilization, against an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't track, and couldn't predict. Ships began disappearing from formation. First dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. No weapon signatures, no explosion debris, no distress calls. They simply weren't there anymore. The holographic display showed the hegemony formation slowly shrinking as ships vanished without explanation. After 18 hours of this, Fleet Admiral Korth Prime ordered a general retreat. The remaining ships attempted to withdraw to the outer system, but Vex-Nine clicked his mandibles slowly. Well, let's just say that the humans had become very good at making sure their enemies didn't leave to tell others about their capabilities. "How many ships escaped?" Trin whispered. "None!" The single word hung in the air like a death sentence. 40 million ships, 16 trillion personnel. The greatest military force ever assembled in this galaxy. The professor's voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. Gone in 37 hours, without managing to inflict a single confirmed casualty on their opponents. The classroom was so quiet that the hum of the station's life support system seemed deafening. After the Battle of the Void, Vex-Nine continued, the hegemony's client species began to reconsider their allegiances. Rebellions broke out in 17 sectors. 3 founding member species petitioned for immediate withdrawal from hegemony space. The Corvani Dominion declared neutrality and closed its borders. The entire galactic order that had existed for millennia began to crumble. Cadet Sil looked up from her notes. What happened next? What happened next, Cadet Dreamcatcher, is that the humans did something that no military strategist in the galaxy had predicted? The professor's mandibles clicked in what might have been admiration. They stopped. Stopped? Stopped fighting. Stopped attacking hegemony assets. Stopped making hegemony fleets disappear. They sent a single transmission to the Hegemony Council. The debt has been paid. Leave us alone, and we will leave you alone. Brix shifted in his seat. Did the hegemony accept? The hegemony had lost 40 million ships and 16 trillion personnel to an enemy they had never managed to so much as scratch. What do you think they did? They accepted, Kor said quietly. They accepted so fast that the surrender documents were transmitted within 6 hours of receiving the human message. Vex-Nine confirmed. The Treaty of the Void established the current neutral zones and non-interference protocols that still govern interspecies relations today. Zira raised her hand slowly. Professor, if all of this is true, then why are we studying it as an example of human defeat? It sounds like they won. Professor Vex-Nine's compound eyes focused on her with what appeared to be approval. That, Cadet Moonwhisper, is an excellent question. Perhaps you should ask whoever wrote your textbook. The young Velothi looked down at her datapad, scrolling through the assigned reading materials. Professor, I don't understand. The textbook clearly states that humanity was defeated and extinct. But according to your lecture. According to my lecture, the humans achieved every strategic objective they set for themselves. They avenged their homeworld, crippled the military force that destroyed it, and established themselves as a power that no one in this galaxy wants to cross. Trin flickered with confusion. Then why does our textbook say they lost? I suppose, the professor said with deliberate care, that depends on who you ask. The hegemony's official position has always been that the Sol-Hegemony War ended with human extinction. It's much more comfortable to believe that than to admit that a primitive species managed to bring the galaxy's greatest civilization to its knees. Sil looked up from her datapad. Professor, there's something else. The textbook says the war ended with the bombardment of Earth. But you mentioned Phase 2 beginning 2 centuries later. When did the war actually end? Officially, the war ended when Earth was destroyed. Unofficially, Vex-Nine's mandibles clicked rapidly. The war ended with the Treaty of the Void, 312 years later. Kor's implants whirred as he processed this information. So, the humans fought a 3-century war against the entire hegemony and won? That's one way to look at it. Another way would be to say that the humans spent 3 centuries preparing for a 37-hour battle that ended galactic civilization as we knew it. Zira's chromatic skin had settled into a deep, thoughtful purple. Professor, are the humans still out there? What do you think, Cadet Moonwhisper? I think, she said slowly, that a species capable of making 40 million ships disappear probably doesn't go extinct easily. A reasonable assessment. The professor's tone had become almost approving. The neutral zones established by the Treaty of the Void remain in effect to this day. 17 sectors of space that no hegemony vessel is permitted to enter under any circumstances. And if someone did enter those sectors? Brix asked. No one has ever tried, Cadet Starfall. Even the most rebellious species seem to understand that there are some boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. The chime indicating the end of the class period rang through the amphitheater, but none of the students moved. Professor, Zira said carefully, you mentioned that this was a textbook example of how superior technology and numbers guarantee victory. But it sounds like the opposite happened. Vex-Nine's compound eyes glittered with what might have been amusement. Indeed it does, doesn't it? Perhaps that's a lesson worth remembering, future officers. The galaxy is a much larger and stranger place than our textbooks would have us believe. As the students began gathering their materials, Trin flickered with curiosity. Professor, will we be learning more about human military tactics in future classes? I'm afraid not, Cadet Voidseeker. The hegemony's official curriculum doesn't include detailed analysis of human strategic doctrine. Too unsettling for young military minds, apparently. Kor's implants whirred softly. Where could we find more information about this conflict? The complete records are classified at the highest levels. However, the professor paused meaningfully. There are rumors that certain independent researchers have compiled more comprehensive accounts. Such materials would, of course, be completely outside official channels. Zira stood slowly, her mind racing. Professor, you mentioned that the textbook states the war ended with Earth's destruction, but earlier you said something about reading to the last page. What did you mean? Professor Vex-Nine's mandibles clicked once, slowly. Did I say that? How curious. Perhaps I was thinking of a different textbook entirely. One that might include a more complete account of events. As the students filed out of the amphitheater, each lost in their own thoughts about what they'd learned, Professor Vex-Nine remained at his podium. His compound eyes tracked their departure, and his mandibles clicked in a pattern that might have been satisfaction. Tomorrow would bring another class, another group of young minds eager to learn about military history, and perhaps, if they were very lucky, some of them would be curious enough to ask the right questions. After all, the galaxy was full of stories that didn't make it into official textbooks. Stories about species that refused to stay extinct, wars that lasted centuries, and lessons that certain authorities preferred to keep classified. But that, Professor Vex-Nine reflected, was a problem for tomorrow's lecture. Today's lesson was complete. 3 days had passed since Professor Vex-Nine's revelation about the Sol-Hegemony War, and Cadet Zira Moonwhisper couldn't shake the feeling that her entire education had been built on carefully constructed lies. She sat in the Academy's vast library, surrounded by data crystals and holographic displays, searching for any mention of the mysterious last page the professor had hinted at. "Find anything interesting?" Zira looked up to see Cadet Core Nightbane approaching, his cybernetic implants casting soft blue light in the dimmed library atmosphere. Behind him walked Trin Void Seeker, whose translucent form flickered with nervous energy. "Nothing official," Zira replied, her chromatic skin shifting to frustrated orange. "Every database I access gives me the same sanitized version. Earth destroyed, humans extinct, war over in less than a day." Trin settled into a nearby chair, her ethereal form becoming more solid as she focused. "I've been thinking about what the professor said, about independent researchers compiling more comprehensive accounts." Core's implants whirred softly as he processed this. "I may know someone who could help. My neural enhancement came from a black market technician who specialized in accessing restricted information networks." "That sounds incredibly illegal," Zira pointed out. "So is lying to military cadets about galactic history," Core replied with a shrug that made his mechanical parts click softly. Before anyone could respond, a new voice interrupted their conversation. "Mind if I join this little conspiracy?" They turned to see Cadet Brick's Starfall lumbering toward them, his massive, rocky form making the library floor vibrate slightly with each step. Behind him came Sil Dreamcatcher, looking unusually determined for someone whose species was known for peaceful contemplation. "We've all been asking the same questions," Sil explained as she settled gracefully beside the group. "And I think I may have found something." She activated her personal data pad, projecting a holographic document into the center of their impromptu circle. "This is a shipping manifest from the Academy archives," Sil continued. "It lists educational materials ordered for military history courses. Look at entry number 4847. Zira leaned forward to read the manifest. "Textbook, Sol-Hegemony Conflict, Complete Historical Analysis. Author, Professor Emeritus Kix Alpha. Publication, Neutral Academic Press. Status, Restricted Access." "There's a complete version," Trin whispered, her form flickering with excitement. "And it's here," Brix rumbled. "Somewhere in this academy." Core's implants hummed as they interfaced with the library's catalog system. According to the restricted archives, that particular text is stored in Sub-Level 7. Maximum security clearance required. Sub-Level 7? Zira's skin shifted to pale blue. "That's where they keep classified materials about active military operations." "Which suggests," Sil said quietly, "that whatever's in that textbook isn't ancient history." The group exchanged glances, each of them understanding the implications. They were cadets, barely trusted with basic weapons training, contemplating breaking into one of the most secure areas of the academy. "We could get expelled," Zira pointed out. "Or worse. We could also spend the rest of our military careers believing comfortable lies," Core replied. "I don't know about you, but I'd rather face court-martial than live in ignorance." Trin flickered more rapidly, which among Etherians indicated deep thought. "There might be another way. My species has certain abilities that solid matter species lack. I could potentially access the restricted section without triggering physical security measures." "You mean phase through the walls?" Brix asked. "Something like that. But I'd need you all to create a distraction, and someone would need to be ready to receive and copy the information quickly." Core tapped his temple, where his most advanced implants were housed. "I can interface directly with most data storage systems. If you can get me access to the archive terminal, I can download the entire textbook in seconds." "This is insane," Zira muttered. But even as she spoke, her chromatic skin was shifting to determined gold. "When do we do it?" "Tonight," Sil suggested. During the third shift change, security will be focused on routine patrols, and most staff will be off duty. They spent the next several hours planning their approach with the kind of tactical precision that would have made their instructors proud if those same instructors weren't the ones they were planning to circumvent. At exactly 0300 hours station time, 5 young cadets put their plan into motion. Brix positioned himself near the main security checkpoint, where his massive form and tendency to accidentally bump into things would provide perfect cover for a maintenance emergency. Sil took position at the library's central information terminal, ready to access backup systems if needed. Zira stationed herself as lookout, her chromatic abilities allowing her to blend with the shadows. Kor and Trin made their way to the restricted access elevator that led to sub-level 7. "You sure about this?" Kor whispered as they approached the heavily secured entrance. "About as sure as anyone can be when attempting to phase through quantum-encrypted security barriers," Trin replied, her form already beginning to shimmer and fade. The Etherian cadet became increasingly translucent until she was barely visible, then stepped forward and simply walked through the solid metal doors of the restricted elevator shaft. Kor waited, his implants monitoring security frequencies for any sign of alarm. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only minutes, he heard the soft hiss of the elevator doors opening from the inside. "Come on," Trin's voice whispered from the empty-looking elevator. "I managed to override the call system from inside." They descended through 7 levels of increasingly sophisticated security measures, each one designed to keep unauthorized personnel away from the Academy's most sensitive information. When the doors finally opened onto sub-level 7, both cadets stopped in amazement. The restricted archive was enormous. Row upon row of data storage units stretched into the distance, each one containing classified information about military operations, alien species profiles, and historical records that the general population was never meant to see. "Archive Terminal 77 Alpha," Kor read from his implant's navigation system. "This way." They made their way through the maze of storage units until they found the correct terminal. Kor placed his hands on the interface ports, and his implants immediately began interfacing with the system. "I'm in," he whispered, searching for... Got it. Sol-Hegemony conflict. Complete historical analysis. Initiating download. As data flowed through his cybernetic enhancements, Kor's expression began to change. His implants were processing the information faster than conscious thought, but even the preliminary data was staggering. "Trin," he said urgently, "we need to get out of here. Now." "What is it? What did you find?" "I found the last page," Kor replied grimly, "and I understand why they don't want cadets reading it." They made their way back to the elevator, Trin once again phasing through security barriers to get them out of the restricted levels. By the time they rejoined the others in the library, Kor's implants had finished processing the downloaded information. "Well?" Zira asked anxiously, her skin cycling through nervous color patterns. Kor looked around the group, his expression serious. "The textbook we've been using ends with Earth's destruction, because that's where the hegemony wanted the story to end. The real textbook has 16 more chapters." "About what?" Sil pressed. "About what happened after the Treaty of the Void," Kor replied. "About what the humans have been doing for the past century." Brix leaned forward, his rocky features showing unusual concern. "Are they still fighting?" "No," Kor said slowly. "They're building." He activated his implant's projection system, filling the space around them with holographic data displays. According to Professor Kix Alpha's complete analysis, the human survivors didn't just develop advanced stealth technology during their exile. They developed something much more significant. A completely new approach to civilization. The displays showed star charts, but not like anything the cadets had seen before. Instead of the traditional territories and boundaries that defined hegemony space, these charts showed interconnected networks of hidden installations, mobile habitats, and what the text described as distributed infrastructure nodes. "They're not trying to claim territory," Trin observed, her form flickering with realization. "They're building something else entirely." Exactly. The humans learned something during their 3-century war with the hegemony. They learned that traditional civilizations, no matter how powerful, are vulnerable. Planets can be destroyed. Fleets can be defeated. Governments can be conquered. Zira's skin shifted to deep purple as she processed the implications. But if you don't have planets, or fleets, or governments, then you can't be conquered, Core finished. The humans have created what Professor Kix Alpha calls a nomadic meta-civilization. They exist everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Syl studied the data displays with growing amazement. "How many of them are there?" "That's the terrifying part," Core replied. "According to these records, no one knows. The human population could be in the millions, billions, or even trillions. They could have colonies in every star system in the galaxy, or they could be extinct except for a few thousand survivors." "And the hegemony has no way to find out," Brix rumbled. "Worse than that. According to the final chapters of this textbook, the hegemony has been slowly losing track of its own assets. Outposts going dark, patrol routes becoming unreliable, communication networks experiencing mysterious interference. The holographic displays shifted to show incident reports spanning decades. Each one described the same pattern: normal operations, brief disruption, then either complete silence or significantly reduced efficiency. "They're not attacking us," Trin realized. "They're managing us." The text suggests that human agents have been working to gradually reduce the hegemony's ability to project power beyond its core systems. Not through direct confrontation, but through systematic degradation of infrastructure and communications. Zira felt her chromatic skin shift to alarmed yellow. "Why?" "Insurance," Core replied simply. "They want to make sure that what happened to Earth can never happen to anyone else. Not because they care about other species, but because they understand that the kind of civilization that would destroy an entire world for refusing to submit is the kind of civilization that will eventually destroy everything." Syl looked up from the data she'd been analyzing. "There's something else here. References to something called Project Seedfall." Core's implants whirred as they accessed that section of the downloaded information. "Project Seedfall appears to be—" "Oh." "Oh what?" Brix demanded. "It's a contingency plan. If the hegemony ever attempts another large-scale extermination campaign against any species, the humans will respond by systematically dismantling galactic civilization." The library fell silent as the implications sank in. "Dismantling how?" Zira whispered. "Communications networks, transportation hubs, resource distribution centers, government facilities, everything that keeps billions of beings alive and connected across thousands of worlds." Core's voice was grim. "According to this analysis, they've already identified every critical vulnerability in hegemony infrastructure." "They're holding the entire galaxy hostage," Trin breathed. "No," Syl corrected, her peaceful species perspective offering a different interpretation. "They're holding the galaxy's ability to commit genocide hostage." "There's a difference." Brix shifted uncomfortably. "What happens if someone calls their bluff?" Core accessed another section of the textbook. According to Professor Vex-Alpha's research, it's not a bluff. 3 years ago, the hegemony client state of Nexus Prime attempted to exterminate a neighboring species over a territorial dispute. The operation lasted exactly 18 hours before every piece of military equipment on Nexus Prime simply stopped working. Stopped working how? Power systems failed. Weapons wouldn't fire. Ships couldn't achieve orbit. Communications went dead. The entire military infrastructure of an advanced civilization rendered completely inert in less than a day. Zira's skin had gone completely white. What did Nexus Prime do? What could they do? They sued for peace, accepted refugee populations from the species they'd been trying to exterminate, and established a joint colonization program. Within a year, both species were working together on terraforming projects. And their military systems came back online the day the peace treaty was signed. The group sat in stunned silence, each of them trying to process the reality of what they'd learned. So the humans won, Sil said finally. The humans won in the most complete way possible, Core agreed. They didn't just defeat the hegemony. They made the kind of war that destroyed their homeworld impossible for anyone to fight. But why keep it secret? Trin asked. Why not tell people the truth? Because, a familiar voice said from behind them, the truth would cause panic on a galactic scale. They spun around to see Professor Vex-Nine approaching their study area, his compound eyes gleaming with what might have been approval. Professor! Zira's skin flashed through a dozen colors in rapid succession. We can explain. Can you? That should be interesting. Vex-Nine settled into a chair that creaked ominously under his chitinous frame. Let's start with how you accessed Sub-Level 7 without triggering a single security alert. The cadets exchanged guilty glances. Actually, the professor continued, let's start with why you thought it was necessary to access restricted materials in the first place. Wasn't my lecture informative enough? Your lecture raised more questions than it answered, Core said carefully. Good. That was the point. Vex-Nine's mandibles clicked in what was definitely amusement now. Tell me, Cadet Nightbane, what did you learn from Professor Vex-Alpha's complete analysis? That everything we've been taught about galactic history is carefully edited propaganda designed to prevent mass hysteria, Core replied. And what do you think should be done with that information? The question hung in the air like a challenge. We should tell everyone, Trin said immediately. People have a right to know the truth. Do they? Vex-Nine asked. Cadet Starfall, what do you think would happen if the general population learned that an unknown number of humans are currently managing galactic civilization from the shadows? Brix considered this carefully. Panic, fear, probably demands for military action against the neutral zones. And what would be the result of military action against entities capable of making 40 million ships disappear? The end of galactic civilization as we know it, Sil whispered. Precisely. The current arrangement, uncomfortable as it may be, represents a stable equilibrium. The humans remain hidden. The hegemony maintains the illusion of control, and species across the galaxy enjoy a level of peace and security that hasn't existed for millennia. Zira's skin had settled into thoughtful silver. So we just pretend we don't know? You have several options, Cadet Moonwhisper. You can pretend you don't know, which would be the safest course for your careers. You can attempt to expose the truth, which would likely result in your disappearance and the suppression of the information anyway. Or, ... Quote. Or what? Core asked. Or you can accept that you now possess knowledge that comes with responsibility. The responsibility to help maintain the balance that keeps billions of beings safe. Professor Vex-Nine stood, his movements surprisingly graceful for such a large creature. The truth is, he continued, that a few select military officers in each generation are allowed to learn the complete history. Not many, just enough to ensure that if circumstances change, someone will understand why certain decisions were made and what the alternatives might cost. You're recruiting us, Trin realized. I'm offering you a choice. You can return to your regular classes, graduate as standard military officers, and serve with distinction in whatever capacity the hegemony assigns you. Or you can choose to serve a different function. What kind of function? Sil asked. The kind that involves making sure the current peace continues. The kind that requires understanding uncomfortable truths and living with necessary secrets. The kind that might occasionally involve making contact with entities that officially don't exist. The implications of this offer settled over the group like a heavy blanket. What would we be, exactly? Zira asked quietly. Officially? Special attachés to the diplomatic corps, assigned to neutral zone monitoring and treaty compliance verification. Unofficially? Professor Vex-Nine's compound eyes seemed to twinkle. Unofficially, you'd be part of a very small group of individuals who help ensure that the lessons learned from the Sol-Hegemony War are never forgotten, and that the conditions that made that war possible never arise again. Corps' implants whirred as they processed this information. How many others know? Across the entire hegemony? Perhaps 1,000 individuals at any given time. Enough to maintain institutional memory, not enough to risk exposure. And the humans know about us, Brix asked. The humans know about everything, Cadet Starfall. The question is whether they consider us useful allies in maintaining galactic stability, or potential threats to be managed. Which are we? That, Professor Vex-Nine said, with what sounded like genuine warmth, depends entirely on the choices you make from this point forward. The professor began walking toward the library exit, then paused. Oh, and cadets? The textbook you downloaded contains one final chapter that Cadet Nightbane's implants haven't processed yet. I suggest you read it carefully. It contains some interesting insights about what the humans might be planning for the future. After he left, the group sat in contemplative silence for several minutes. Well, Zira said finally, I guess we're not going to be standard military officers. Looks that way, Core agreed. Trin, are you okay with this? The Etherian flickered thoughtfully. My species has always believed that understanding leads to wisdom, and wisdom leads to peace. If what we learned tonight is true, then this might be the most important piece in Galactic history. Sil? Brix rumbled. Someone needs to know the truth. If that someone is us, then we have an obligation to bear that responsibility. Core activated his implants and accessed the final chapter of the textbook. As the information flowed through his cybernetic systems, his expression grew increasingly amazed. What is it? Zira asked. The final chapter is titled Looking Forward, Humanity's Next Phase, Core replied. And according to Professor Kix Alpha's analysis, the humans aren't planning to stay hidden forever. What do you mean? They're preparing for something called integration protocol, a gradual process of revealing themselves to galactic civilization, but only after they've determined that the galaxy is ready for that knowledge. Ready how? Core's implants finished processing the data. Ready to accept that survival might require cooperation instead of domination. ready to understand that diversity of thought and approach makes civilization stronger, not weaker, ready to build something better than what came before. Trin flickered with sudden understanding. They're not managing us to keep us weak. They're managing us to help us grow. Growing toward what? Sil asked. Toward a galactic civilization that doesn't need to be secretly managed by survivors of its own atrocities, Brix realized. Zira's chromatic skin settled into a deep, determined gold. Then I guess we have work to do. As the 5 cadets gathered their materials and prepared to begin their new roles as guardians of uncomfortable truths, none of them noticed the small device that had been recording their conversation from the ventilation system above. In a facility that officially didn't exist, in a star system that wasn't on any chart, a figure in environmental armor reviewed the recording with something that might have been satisfaction. The next generation was ready to learn. The next phase of the plan could begin. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, the children of Earth continued their patient work of building a galaxy where no world would ever burn again. The class had been told Earth lost that war. But the truth, as always, was far more complex and far more hopeful than anyone had dared to imagine.